رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. Bismillah. Alhamdulillah, indeed all glory and praise is due to Allah. We glorify and praise Him and we ask Him for help and forgiveness. In Allah we seek refuge from the evils of ourselves and from our wrongdoings. He whom Allah guides shall not be misguided, and he whom Allah misguides shall never be guided. I bear witness that there is no true God except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, alone without any partners. And I bear witness that Muhammad sallam is his abd and messenger. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajeem. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Today I'm going to do a lecture on the evolution of fiqh, Islamic law and mazhabs, in order to enumerate the various reasons which are behind contradictory rulings of different fiqh schools. We know that at the present there are four leading Islamic fiqh schools, namely the Hanafi school, the Hanbali school, the Shafi'i school, and the Maliki school. But let me remind you that these were not the only schools which came into existence at the time of evolution of fiqh. There were many other fiqh schools as well, very well known and renowned fiqh schools with very famous imams. But they couldn't weather the challenge of time. And these are the fiqh schools which we have now that bear the challenge of time because of many factors. Inshallah, we are going to go through them. So these lectures on the evolution of fiqh, they might be multiple. I might not be able to finish it in a couple of lectures, maybe 2 or 3. I'll try to shorten it as much as possible. But keeping in view that you understand what is being said, I'll try to explain things as much as is possible online. So the main idea behind these lectures is that every Muslim is told around the globe that they have to follow one of these four fiqh schools, and it is assumed that these four fiqh schools are divinely ordained and are infallible. They cannot go wrong. And if a Muslim follows any of the one, he can choose whichever he wants to follow. Any of the one he follows, he's going to be correct and he's going to be absolutely fine. But the problem arises when a thinking Muslim sees that the ruling on any one of the issues, the ruling prohibits one thing and makes it haram in one of the fiqh school, is allowed and completely halal in the other fiqh school. That is very difficult to comprehend by a thinking Muslim. He does not understand how he can be in a state of halal according to one fiqh school, the same time being in a state of haram according to the other fiqh school, when all the fiqh schools are correct and they are infallible. So this becomes a huge dilemma for the thinking Muslims. So I like to give an example which I'll explain later on. According to Shafi'i school, if a person who has done his ablution wuzu and touches a woman intentionally or unintentionally, he has to make a wuzu again in order to pray, to make salah. But according to the Hanafi school, it is not required by a person who has intentionally or unintentionally touched a woman. He is not required to make a wuzu before making the salah. So how come it is prohibited in Shafi'i school to make salah after touching a woman? Touching means that even accidentally if you have touched a woman. And in Hanafi school it is completely allowed. So you are in a state of halal and haram at the same time, according to two fiqh schools which are assumed to be correct. Both of them are correct at the same time. So what happens is that the thinking Muslim, maybe he's a convert, a revert, a new revert, or he might be our own kids who have started studying and practicing Islam. They become perplexed. They are not happy by this stagnation and decline of the evolution of fiqh. Fiqh is Islamic law. So they are not happy with this stagnation of and decline of Islamic law, where these obvious, ambiguous problems are not being resolved. So, what happens is that sometimes they become so frustrated that they either completely reject all the fiqh schools and decide to follow the Quran and Sunnah on individual personal basis by themselves, or they stick to one of the four fiqh schools unquestionably, and they do not listen to reason against any of its rulings. So both these outcomes are undesirable. They both lead to deviation, and they can lead to sectarianism. So these are undesirable results. So we have to do something about these problems which are arising. So what happens is that if the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in one of his narrations, he said that the best of generation is my generation, then the generation which follows it, and then the generation which follows it. So best generation is his generation, which is the generation of Sahabas, and then the generation which follows it, which is the Tabi'i, and then the generation which follows them, which are the Tabi'i. So if these three generations, according to the hadith, which is considered as law, are the best generations, then we should have no doubt that their purity of intention and depth of understanding of the Quran and Sunnah was much more than us. So what happens is that it is very difficult for us to assume that any of these three generations had lesser understanding of the fiqh issues than we have. So it is unthinkable. They were close to the time of the Prophet ﷺ, and their understanding of the intentions, their understandings of the fiqh issues, and their purity of intention and pure depth of understanding was much more than us. Why? Because they belong to the same timeline. They have the same social setup, same culture, same language, same kind of environment. So they had a better understanding, and they knew things, they understood things better than us, because of the hadith as well, which is a divine proclamation of their better understanding too. So it is not possible that we completely reject their rulings and the methods they have used to get to those rulings, and we completely reject their guidelines and the links that they have used. We cannot do that. What we can do is that we go back to their guidelines and study how they have made their rulings, and correct them and edit them, and put our own share into the development and evolution of fiqh. But we can, under no circumstances, we cannot reject the rulings of the earlier generations. They were better than us in understanding, they were better than us in their intentions, they were better than us also according to the narration of the Prophet ﷺ, and they were better than us because those times, though they were turbulent as well, they were not times of so much confusion which we are facing nowadays, which has been intentionally or unintentionally be created to cause a lot of damage to the Islamic cause. So it will lead to deviation if we reject the teachings, the rulings of these three generations, and try to make rulings ourselves. Then the other thing is that, on the other hand, if we try to stick unquestionably with one of the schools, then that means that we are in a state of the taqleed. Taqleed is blind following. Blind following is following one of the four fiqh schools without reflecting. My dears, reflecting is ordered in the Quran, and again and again and again. Reflecting is an order of Quran. A believer never follows anything except Quran and Sunnah. Yes, except Quran and Sunnah, without reflecting upon it. Even on Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has repeatedly declared that the Muslims should do ghawr or fikr, or the Muslims should do they should reflect upon it. So blind following, under all circumstances, it is completely undesirable. So what happens is that if you are in a state of taqleed, blind following, you will not reflect upon any reasoning and empirical proof which are provided to you by any other fixed school. And as a result, you will reject them without reflecting upon them, and will result in again decline, stagnation, deviation, and sectarianism. And we see that this is what is happening nowadays. And there's a lot of sectarianism between the four fixed schools. So both of these results are undesirable. So what should be done about this issue, that the ambiguity, the obvious ambiguity which is present amongst the ruling of different fixed schools? Number one, uh, we can follow any of the one fixed schools. That is true. As a layman, as an average civilian public person, the best plan of action is that we should follow any one of the four fixed schools, but not unquestionably. Why? Because after Quran and Sunnah, after Prophet Muhammad sallallahu, who was supervised in all his actions and sayings by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there is no individual alive or dead who had been infallible. Every human being is characterized by making an error. A human being is characterized by making an error. What was the difference between a human, Adam, and the shaitan, the devil? The devil made a mistake and he became arrogant and he did not say sorry. But Adam made a mistake and he went back and he was humble and he said sorry. So we are characterized by making a mistake. There is no human being after Prophet ﷺ who will not make a mistake. It includes all the topmost scholars and topmost imams. Everybody, they were humans and they make mistakes just because they were humans. And so we have to exercise a lot of tolerance. We have to observe all rulings critically to the best of our ability. And in cases where we find empirical proof against the ruling of whichever school of fiqh we are following, we have to follow the empirical evidence. For example, in case of witr prayer, the Hanafi school has ruled that the witr prayer will be prayed in the same way as the Maghrib prayer. But Sahih Hadith is present as a empirical proof that witr prayer was not prayed like the Maghrib prayer, and the Sahih Hadith is present. So a Sahih Hadith is an empirical proof of topmost quality. As soon as a Hadith is Sahih, it gains the status of law. Yes, it is unquestionably law. So we cannot reject it and follow our school. We cannot do it. So we have to follow the Sahih Hadith. So same goes for the way we perform the ablution. There is no masa of the neck included in the ablution according to the according to the Sahih Hadith. So the Hanafi fiqh school, which has ruled that the masa of the neck is compulsory, again we cannot reject the Sahih Hadith. We have to follow the Sahih Hadith. So even if you are following any of the fiqh school, you have to stay critical unless there is unification of all the fiqh schools. So on the individual basis, this is what we can do. It has to be made very clear that Sahih Hadith cannot be rejected under any circumstances. It is law. Even if 100 Zaif Hadiths are presented against that Sahih Hadith, the Sahih Hadith will take the priority. I repeat, the Sahih Hadith will take the priority. Even 100 Zaif Hadiths cannot be prioritized over a single Sahih Hadith. This should be very, very, very clear to every Muslim. So, the final answer to this problem, this ambiguity which arises as a result of contraindication in the contradictions in between the rulings of different fiqh schools, is that we need to do a unification of the fiqh schools on the basis of empirical evidences which are very easily available nowadays. Multiple verifications have been done of different hadiths, and the process is still going on, as we already study the subject of criticism of hadith and severe verification intense verification of the hadith is being done even nowadays. So in this day and age, there is no reason that the fiqh schools cannot be unified. But what is required is that all we need a consensus of all the scholars and ulama which are present globally. And that is a difficulty by itself, not because of the logistics. In the earlier days, the logistics was the issues because of which the imams thought that consensus of all the scholars, global scholars, cannot be done. But now the logistic problem is not there. Internet is present everywhere, even satellite internet, the Starlink is available. It's absolutely not a problem. As long as our intentions are pure and we prioritize Allah with ikhlas, there is no problem. There is no problem at all in creating a unification of religion, unification of madhabs or the fiqh schools. So it is not a problem. But what is required is ikhlas niyat, or the purity of intentions. That is how you can unify the fiqh schools. That is how you can establish Tawheed, because a Muslim does everything for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We do not let our desires, our personal gains, our biases take priority over the commands of Allah. We do not let that happen. A believer does not let that happen. So as long as we are waiting for that level of purity of intention to arise in the ummah, we are waiting for that day, and till then we have to follow our schools critically. That is the answer. So uh, now I'm going to go to the reasons for the appearance of conflicting rulings. So my dears, first thing which I have to make clear over here is that all four fiqh schools have a consensus that the fiqh rulings have to be taken from Quran and Sunnah. The sources of Islamic knowledge, the revealed sources of Islamic knowledge, are Quran and Sunnah, and there are number one sources or primary principles from which the fiqh rulings are extracted. So there's a consensus between all the four fiqh schools that all the fiqh rulings will be taken from number one, Quran; number two, ahadith of the Prophet ﷺ; number three, ijma of the Sahaba; and number four, the qiyas. So let me repeat these, because we have to remember the order in which these primary sources are used. Once we are looking for a ruling for a certain issue, the first source we go for and answer a ruling is the Quran. If we do not find a ruling there, we go to the hadith. If we do not find a ruling there, then we go towards the ijma of the Sahaba. And if we do not find an answer in the ijma of the Sahaba, we go to the qiyas. So in case where we do find an answer in the Quran, we finish our search right there and then, and we do not move to the second source, the hadith. Let me repeat this point very clearly. As soon as we find the answer following this order of looking into the sources of revealed knowledge, we stop there and then, and we do not move any further. We do not look any further. For example, if we have an issue and we're looking for a ruling, we go and explore the Quran. We do not find a ruling there, we go to the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. And let's say that we find a ruling, a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, on which the ruling can be, which is a ruling itself, it is law itself. We take that as law and the ruling, and we do not go any further do not go any further looking for the ruling. We end it there. We end it there. We do not go towards the ijma of Sahaba. We do not look or try to do our own reasoning. It ends there. For example, there is an issue that the Hazrat Abu Hanifa anhu, one of the Sahabi of Rasul used to do wudu, and he used to do the masa of the neck. And this is correct. This is a correct narration that yes, he used to do the masa of the neck. But authentic ahadith are present in which we see that the Prophet ﷺ never did masa of the neck. Sahih ahadith are present there. So we have two evidences. One is the evidence from the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, and the other evidence is by the individual action of a Sahaba. Individual action of a Sahaba. So if we follow the order, because the order has to be followed always. So if we follow the order and we are looking for a ruling how to perform wuzu, and we look into the Quran and we see that Allah has laid down the compulsory elements of the wuzu, but how do we do a complete wuzu? So we look into the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, and there we find a Sahih hadith how to perform the wuzu. So our search for a ruling that how to perform wuzu and whether to do masa of the neck or not ends here. Yes, I repeat it, it ends here. We do not go down to the consensus of Sahaba, and we do not go further down towards chaos of a single Sahabi. We do not do it. We do not do it. I am not saying that Hazrat Abu Huraira was wrong. No, my dears. But the way how fiqh rulings are extracted is that we follow the hierarchy. If we have found a ruling in the Sahih Hadith, that's the end. Because the Quran say, Atiyullah wa Atiyur Rasul. The following, the ataat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is ataat of the Nabi. It was not said it was the ataat of the Sahabi. Yes, if we had no Sahih Hadith for this specific issue, then we have gone forward looking into the Ijma of the Sahaba. And if we didn't find anything there, then we could have gone on and did an ijtihad and looked upon the opinion of different Sahaba. We could have gone there. But when there is Sahih Hadith is present, we cannot ignore the Sahih Hadith. We cannot reject the Sahih Hadith and go forward. Then the question is that why did Hazrat Abu Hurairah did it? That was his personal ijtihad. Because the Prophet ﷺ narrated in another hadith that the water of the wuzu that the believers used are going to make their body shine on the day of judgment. So he used to use the water of the wuzu to wash all of his arms until his armpits and the masa of the neck. So that was his personal ijtihad, and he was absolutely not wrong. He was right in his own way. He was following a hadith. But is it a law for Islamic Ummah? No. Because presence of a Sahih Hadith makes the Sahih Hadith a law, and we do not look forward. I hope I have made myself clear. So different reasons for the appearance of contradictory ahadith is number one, the word meanings and grammatical constructions of Arabic language. Second was hadith narrations, which had variable availability, variable authenticity, variable conditions for the acceptance of hadith between the different fiqh schools, and variable interpretations of the textual conflict. And we are going to do the details of this. Number three was the admissibility of certain principles of extracting fiqh rulings from the sources of Islamic law. And number fourth was different methods or approaches by which the qiyas is done. So there are four different major reasons for the appearance of contradictory rulings between the four fiqh schools, and let me go into some detail. So word meanings, different Arabic words used in the Quran have different meanings at the same time. A single word can have two different literal meanings or two different literal and figurative meaning at the same time. So it became it became difficult by the Ummah, especially when the borders of the Islamic State went beyond the Arabian Peninsula and non-Arab areas came into the state of Islam. The Arabic language was not their first language, so it became difficult for them to understand which meaning of the word has to be taken, especially when there are two different meanings of the same word exist in the Arabic language. So when Quran uses a word, it is the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ which explains that which meaning of that word has to be taken. But it was a problem at that time when the borders of the Islamic State were increasing at a very fast pace, and non-Arab speaking people were embracing Islam. and it became difficult for them because they did not understand Arabic, though many of them were learning Arabic language, but different dialects of Arabic language was there. So there, it was a very it was a big difficulty at that time, and different Sahaba, they spread out in different areas to teach and make things. To control the situation, these situations which were arriving. But of course, there were logistic problems, and um, they were, of course, the communication was not the way it is nowadays. So ambiguities arose at that time, and which was clarified later on, but not completely. Not completely, not before the four fixed school fell into the problem of the Taqleed and blind following, as a result of which no more evolution and correction of the fiqh rulings was done. So we are going to study the evolution of fiqh in the context of the history of Islam. We are going to do it inshallah in the coming lectures, and then I will explain to you how the evolution of fiqh was affected by the turbulent history of Islam. History is always turbulent. It's not the Islamic history which is turbulent. History of the world is very turbulent and very um, bloody as such. So, how these factors, different law and order and other factors, affected the evolution of it, we are going to go through it. At this time, let's focus on the various reasons for the conflicting rulings. So, number one was shared literal meaning. So, the word kur, which is written in the Quran. In Surah Baqarah, ayah number 228, Allah has used the word kuru, as you can see right here on the screen. And Allah says, divorced women should wait 3 kuru before the divorce to be finalized. So, because the word kuru meant menses itself and the interval of purity between the menses. So the word kur represented both of these things. So what happens is that if the divorced woman have to wait 3 kurs before the divorce is finalized. So if the word kur means the interval of purity between the menses, then the order generally is that there first comes the interval of purity, then the menses, then interval of purity, then the menses, then interval of purity, and then the menses. So the fiqh schools which thought that the interval of purity is meant by the word kur here in the Quran, they thought that the divorce will be finalized on the first day of the last menses. And those fiqh schools and fiqh scholars which believed that the word kur means menses itself, they thought that the divorce would be finalized on the last day of the final third menses. So there was a difference of around 3 to 6 days between these two rulings. But of course, it was a matter of law, Islamic law, and you had to um, give a confirm verdict that which ruling has to be done, whether the divorce is finalized on the first day of the last menses or the last day of the last menses. So Malik, Shafi'i, and Ahmad ruled that kur meant the period of purity, and as a result, the divorce will be finalized on the first day of the last menses. But Abu Hanifa ruled that kur meant the actual menses. So, according to the Hanafi school, the divorce of the woman will be finalized on the last day of the last menses or the third menses. And here, because we find a Sahih Hadith which supports the ruling of the Hanafi school, uh, this ruling of the Hanafi school that the word kur means menses and the divorce of the woman will be finalized on the last day of her third menses is the correct one. Why? Because it is narrated from Hazrat Aisha, she said, Habiba had irregular menses and she asked the Prophet ﷺ about it. He told her to stop praying during the days of her course. And as it has been referenced, you can see that this is a hadith of the Muslim. So we cannot reject Sahih Hadith. So we will take this Hadith, and the ruling of the Hanafi school is true. There was another narration by Hazrat Aisha anha where she said, I told Barira to observe a waiting period of 3 menses course. And this is also, we can see that this is also a Sahih Hadith which has been authenticated by Sheikh Albani. So we cannot reject the Sahih Hadith. So the ruling of the Hanafi school is correct and the other rulings will not be taken. Another example of shared meanings is that words which have a literal meaning at the same time they have a figurative meaning. For example, the word lamasatun. The word lamasatun has been used here in Surah Nisa, ayah number 43. Or you touched women and cannot find water, then make the yamum from clean earth, and it is one of the factors which break the state of wudu. So this has been taken as a factor which breaks the state of wudu. So it was very important to explore what is the word lamsadun or the word lams means. So the word lams in Arabic language literally means it's a contact between two objects. But figuratively it means intercourse. So which one is meant here by the Quran? So Ash-Shafi'i ruled that whenever a man who has done wuzu touches a woman, his intentionally or unintentionally his wuzu breaks and he has to do wuzu again before he can perform the salah. This is according to the Shafi'i school. And Malik and Ahmad ruled that if a man who has done wuzu touches a woman and it is pleasurable for him, then his wudu breaks, he has to do it again. Otherwise, it's fine. Both Malik and Ahmad or Hanbali school ruled this because they had a Sahih Hadith in which the Prophet used to touch his wife Aisha's foot in order to move it out of his way when he was performing sujood. So he touched the foot of Hazrat Aisha anha and then he made the sujood without repeating his wuzu. That means that you do not need to do a wuzu. But Ahmed and Malik, they both believed that if it is not pleasurable, whether intentional or unintentional, if the touch is not pleasurable, then you can go ahead with salah without performing wuzu, but otherwise you'll have to do a wuzu. However, the Hanafi school ruled that the word lams meant here in the Quran, it meant intercourse. The figurative meaning has to be taken, and as a result, intentional or unintentional contact between a man and a woman in a state of wuzu will not break the wuzu, whether pleasurable or not pleasurable, because it was not a touch which was meant by this use of the word lams in this ayah. And this ruling of the Hanafi school is supported by the narration of Hazrat Aisha Radhiyallahu anha, who said the Prophet ﷺ kissed some of his wives, then left for salah without performing the wuzu. And the reference tells us that this hadith is also been authenticated by Sheikh Albani, and it is a Sahih hadith, so you cannot ignore it and you cannot reject it. So be critical and follow the ruling which has the most strong empirical evidence. The third kind of ambiguity in the word meanings came by the grammatical constructions. Here the word ilah too has been highlighted because it has been used by Quran to mean two different things. One place in the Quran, the word ilah has been used, as we can see in Surah Baqarah, ayah number 187. It means that and complete the fast up to the night, but it does not include the night. We complete the fast up to the Maghrib prayer, and then the night is not included. But here in the ayah itself, it appears as if the night has to be included as well. No, here the night is not included, and we have authentic hadith of the Prophet ﷺ that he used to break his fast at Maghrib prayer. So the night was never included. But another place in the Quran, in Surah Maryam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in ayah number 86, and we will drive the guilty up to the hell like a very herd. We know by many other places where Allah has narrated that the guilty will not be driven to the edge of the hell alone, they will be thrown in the hell as well. So they will be taken to the edge of the hell and then they will be thrown in the hell as well. Though over here the ilah not only means up to the hell, but it also means they will be thrown in the hell, so hell is included. So the word ilah can be used has been used by the Quran in both ways. Up to and not including, up to and including. So when the fiqh scholars had two opinions concerning the meaning of the following Quranic verse describing an aspect of performing of the wudu. So in Surah Maida, Quran, in ayah number 6, the Quran says, then wash your faces and your hands up to your elbow. So here an ambiguity arose between the fiqh school whether the elbow has to be taken, it has to be washed, or it does not need to be washed. So two opinions arose. Abu Hanifa's student Zafar Daud al-Dahri and some of the Maliki students interpreted that this means that elbow does not need to be included. However, the four imams of all the four schools ruled that the elbow has to be included in the ablution, and this position was supported by the description found in an authentic hadith of the Prophet's method of performing wuzu, and we see that according to the reference, the Noaim ibn Abdullah said that I saw Abu Huraira performing ablution. He washed his face completely, then he washed his right arm including a portion of his upper arm. Then he said, this is how I saw Allah's Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam make the wudu. So this is an authentic hadith which has a authentic chain of narration in it, since it has been narrated by Hazrat Abu Huraira, and we know that majority of the hadiths have been narrated by Hazrat Abu Huraira. So we take the hadith and we follow the this ruling of which has been endorsed by all four imams. The second main reason for contradictory rulings between the fiqh schools was narration of hadith. These narration of hadiths had a problem. There are multiple problems and we are going to talk about them. Number one is the availability of the hadith. So as I have mentioned earlier as well, that when the borders of the Islamic State started spreading at a very fast pace, and the Islamic State ranged from all the northern Africa and part of Andalusia, Spain, up till the Sindh province of Pakistan now. The Sahaba at that time, they dispersed. They moved to far-flung areas in order to teach. For example, Hazrat Abdullah bin Masood and Hazrat Ali, they moved to Iraq, Kufa. We know that they moved to Iraq, Kufa. So many ahadiths which have been narrated by these Sahaba, they were locally available for the people of Iraq, Kufa, and they were not available for the people of the other parts of the Islamic State. For example, in Medina, because we know that the Hanafi school started in Iraq. It had its center in Iraq, but the Maliki school at the same time had its center in Medina. So the ahadith which were narrated by the Sahaba, which were not present in Medina, never reached Medina. And there were only a few Sahaba, mainstream Sahaba, whose narrations were not available in Medina, but they were available in other centers. Majority of the Sahaba remained in Medina, and a very rich source of hadith narration was available in Medina, and the Maliki school made use of that narrations. But on some issues, the authentic hadiths were not present in Medina and they were present in Kufa. But the school which suffered most by the lack of availability of the hadith was the Hanafi school, because that was the first school which was formed. Imam Abu Hanifa was the eldest of these four main fiqh schools. He was the eldest of the four, and he had to do a lot of ijtihad by himself to make Islamic rulings, because this was not available there. And we know that because of the distance between Medina and Kufa and the turbulent times which were going on at that time, the turbulence which started at the time of death of Hazrat Usman anhu, and then continued in the time of Hazrat Ali, and then Umayyads, and then the Abbasids take over from the Umayyads. So this turbulence caused a lot of upheaval in the evolution of Islamic fiqh, and the traveling of the hadith was interrupted, and the Hanafi school did a lot of ijtihad by themselves, because the new converts in Iraq and Kufa and surrounding areas, they needed rulings. They wanted Islamic rulings, and if they could not find authentic hadith, they had to make their own ijtihad. So they did their best to provide Islamic rulings to the local people without the availability of Sahih Hadith. They did not know whether they existed at all or not. So what happens is that they did their own ijtihad, and we know that ijtihad is always based upon primary sources of Islamic law, the revealed sources of Islamic law. So performed authentic ijtihad was performed by them, which had its basis in Islam, in Quran and Sunnah, and they provided Islamic rulings to the local people. May Allah bless them for their purity of intentions. They did their best, and Allah knows best about everybody's intentions. So what happened was that the madhabs, the main madhabs, the Hanafi madhab, and then the Maliki madhab, and then the Shafi madhab, and then the Hanbali madhab, they were founded between the middle of the 8th century and the early part of 9th century, whereas the most authentic and comprehensive compilation of the hadith were not available until the later part of the 9th century and the early decades of the 10th century. So we know that the first compilation of the hadith, verified hadith, were done by Imam Bukhari, and Imam Bukhari was a student of Imam Ahmad Hanbal, who was the last of the 4 great Imams. So we know that Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal also did a compilation of hadith, the Musnad Ahmad, but they were not verified, my dears. They were not verified hadiths. What Imam Bukhari did was a complete verification of hadith. And after him, Imam Muslim as well. They made a compilation of verified hadith, Sahih hadith only, which are law by itself. The complete Sahih Hadith of Imam Bukhari and the complete Sahih Hadith of Imam Muslim are taken as law. So they were not available to these 4 fiqh schools, as I have just told you the timeline. So they based their narrations on ijtihad and sometimes the fabricated hadiths which were available at that time. And let me give an example that Imam Abu Hanifa ruled that istisqa, or the prayer of rain, did not include formal congregational prayer. He ruled that formal congregational prayer was haram. It was not required for the prayer of rain. His position was based on the narration of Anas bin Malik, in which the Prophet ﷺ on an occasion made a spontaneous dua for rain without making salah. So he thought that spontaneous dua has to be made without a salah, and salah was wrong and it was forbidden according to him. But later on, his students Abu Yusuf and Muhammad and the other imams all agreed that salah for this istisqa was correct. Their position was based upon the narration of Abad ibn Tamim and other, in which the Prophet ﷺ is reported to have gone out of the prayer area, made dua for rain facing the Qibla, reversed his cloak and led the prayer in 2 units of salah. So although the Hanafi school had ruled according to hadith, a hadith which was a Sahih hadith, let's see, yes, it was a hadith of the Muslim. So the ruling was correct that a salah is not required according to that hadith, and it was considered haram because they did not have access to the other hadith where Prophet ﷺ had prayed 2 units of salah as well. So making a dua without salah is okay, and making a dua with salah is also okay, because we have authentic hadiths which are supporting both these rulings. Now I hope I made myself clear. Second problem, one was the inavailability of hadith to the Hanafi school in Iraq. The other problem was weak narration of hadith. So there was the availability of fabricated hadith. So weakness, the hadiths are of 3 types. Once the verification of hadith is done, they fall into 3 categories. There are the most strong kind of hadith, which are called the Sahih hadith, which are always taken as law. Then there is second category, in which we have Hasan hadith, which are good ahadiths and can be taken as law. And then the third category is the Zaif hadith, or the weak hadith, and they are generally avoided and not taken as law at all. So the weak hadiths have 10 different categories, and out of these 10 different categories, as I've already said, that they are not taken as law, but out of these 10 different categories of weak hadiths, only one mursal hadith has been taken by a few Islamic fiqh schools as law as well. and I will explain it later why it was done. But the problem here was that a lot of fabrication of hadith had been started. As I've already mentioned, that the Islamic State was undergoing a lot of turbulence, and there was a lot of law and order problem because of different fitnas which appeared after the death of Hazrat Usman radiallahu anhu, and they continued afterwards, and they are still there nowadays. So these, in order to support different point of views, and in order to um, find support in the hadith narrations for their own deviant beliefs, they people of Kufa, Iraq, people of Iraq, they indulged in the problem of fabrication. So the center of fabrication of hadith was the Iraq area, and this was done for various reasons, and all of those reasons were basically deviant reasons, and personal gains, and biases, and for maligning and producing confusion for the Muslims, for breaking them from within. The hypocrites did it. So there were many reasons, and we are going to do it inshallah when we do the history of Islam and evolution of fiqh. So there were different reasons, all based in insincerity, that led to the fabrication of hadith, which is completely forbidden in Islam. Fabrication of hadith is completely forbidden in Islam. The Prophet ﷺ once said that whoever attributes to me something which I have not said and done, he finds his place in Jahannam. And I'm just paraphrasing this hadith. So it is absolutely not allowed to fabricate hadith or attribute something to the Prophet ﷺ which he has not done or said. But alas, a lot of fabrication was done, and Imam Hanifa, Abu Hanifa knew about it, that fabrication is being done. So he was very careful while making ruling, that he might not base his ruling upon fabricated hadith. But he was deceived at a number of times, and the rulings were made which were based upon fabricated or weak hadith, and later on many of these rulings were edited and corrected by the school, but some, as we can see, are still there. So for example, Imam Abu Hanifa, his companions, and Imam Ahmad Hanbal all held that the state of wudu is broken by vomiting, basing their ruling on the hadith attributed to Aisha radiallahu anha, in which she reportedly claimed that the Prophet ﷺ said, whoever is afflicted by care, ruaf, or kals, different forms of vomiting, should leave the salah, make wudu, then continue where he left off without speaking during it. And the reference says that it was collected by Majah, and it has been verified as a Zaif hadith by Sheikh Albani. So later on, Imam Shafi and Imam Malik ruled for two reasons that care vomit did not break wudu. First, the above mentioned hadith was not authentic. So they found out, Imam Malik found out, and we know that Imam Shafi also attended the Maliki school. He studied under the Maliki school as well. So Imam Shafi and Imam Malik, both of them, they ruled that this hadith was not authentic, and care is not specifically mentioned in any other source of Islamic law as an act which breaks wudu. So they ruled that care or vomiting does not break the wudu. So this is what we take as law, because the initial reading of Imam Abu Hanifa was based upon a weak hadith. So they studied it and found that the hadith was weak, and then they made their own ijtihad, and they found out that since none of the other sources say that vomiting is a source of breaking the wudu, so they ruled that vomit does not break the wudu, and it was based upon their own ijtihad. The third condition was the condition for the acceptance of hadith. So all the four fiqh schools had certain conditions which had to be met before they could take a hadith as law. And as I've already told, that a lot of fabrication was being done in the Iraq area. So Imam Abu Hanifa was very careful to take any of the hadith as a rule as a basis of his ruling. So he ruled that the condition for taking a hadith as law was that the hadith has to be mashhur. He would not take an individual hadith which was narrated by a single narrator, whether he was authentic or not. He wanted that a hadith which he takes as law has to be a mashhur hadith, a famous hadith which has been narrated by multiple narrators. So it has to come to him by multiple chains of narrations, multiple chains of narrators, and who are authentic narrators, so that too so that he could it could be verified by multiple ways that this is a mashhur, authentic or famous hadith. So it must be a authentic hadith, because many people are narrating it and many of them are authentic narrators. But Maliki school narrated that hadith must not contradict the customs of the people of Medina in order to be admissible. So for Maliki school, for an hadith to be made law, it was important that the people of Medina were actually using it as law. It was a custom of the people of Medina. This was a condition which was laid down by Imam Malik, because his thought was that since the Prophet stayed in Medina and most of the Sahaba stayed in Medina, and now the people of Medina are the descendants, direct descendants of the Prophet and the Sahabi, so they only do things and say things which have been brought down to them from the Prophet and the Sahabi. So he believed that everything which was done by the people of Medina had its source either from the Prophet or from the Sahaba. So anything which contradicts the customs of the people of Medina was not an authentic hadith. Then Imam Ahmad considered Mursal hadith acceptable as proof as well. So Imam Ahmad, we know that Imam Ahmad was there at the time, in extremely turbulent time, when the fitna of the Muttazila was there as well, and a lot of fabrication of hadith was being done as well, and the movement. And we know that he was also in Baghdad. Imam Ahmad was the Imam of Baghdad. So because of the political conditions, and the hadith used to the authentication of hadith was a very big problem, and the Muttazila fitna was there as well. So he was so scared of using his own ijtihad that he used to prefer the mursal weak hadith over his own ijtihad, because he said that if I did ijtihad, it was going to be my opinion. Though it is rooted and based upon Quran and Sunnah, but still it is my opinion. So he preferred the mursal hadith of Prophet ﷺ over his own ijtihad. Now what exactly is a mursal hadith? As I have already explained, that mursal hadith is a weak hadith, because the name in the chain of narrators, we know that in every hadith there are two things. In this criticism of hadith, or the subject of criticism of hadith, which is done for the verification of hadith, there are two things which are looked into the hadith: the matan of the hadith and the chain of narrators from which the hadith has reached you. So in the chain of narration in a mursal hadith, the name of the sahabi who has narrated this hadith to the tabi'i is not mentioned. So a mursal hadith is a hadith in which a tabi'i narrates directly from the Prophet without mentioning the name of the sahabi who has narrated that hadith of the Prophet ﷺ to the tabi'i. This is a mursal hadith, and Imam Ahmad used to take this hadith as law. At the same time, Imam Shafi'i also accepted mursal hadith, but of Sayyid ibn Musayyab only. So Sayyid ibn Musayyab was a tabi'i, and he had narrated a hadith from the Prophet ﷺ without mentioning the name of the sahabi from which he has taken that narrative, because at the time of the tabi'i, Prophet ﷺ was not alive. So the tabi'i could not have taken it directly from the Prophet. Some sahabi must have narrated it to him. But the authenticity of the tabi'i was so much, especially Sayyid ibn Musayyab, that his mursal hadiths were taken as law by Imam Shafi'i. If we can go back to the hadith which I mentioned earlier, that the Prophet ﷺ said, best generation is my generation, the generation of Sahaba, then those who follow them, the generation of Tabi'i, and then those who follow them, the generation of Tabi Tabi'i. So that's why because the authenticity of these three generations has been authenticated by a Sahih hadith, by a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ as well. That's why these two Imams, Imam Hanbal and Imam Shafi'i, used to take the Mursal hadith as well as law. But the other two schools did not take it as law, so a contradiction appeared between the fiqh schools. Then there was a problem of resolution of textual conflict in the hadith. So, what is textual conflict in hadith? Uh, for example, there are two hadiths, both of which are of good strength. Both of them are Sahih hadiths, but they are contradicting each other. As we know that there is no contradiction in Quran and no contradiction in Sunnah, I repeat again, as it is our belief as a Muslim that there is no contradiction in Quran and there is no contradiction in Hadith, the scholars strived to reconcile the two Hadiths. And there were two ways in which the scholars did that. One was the method of tarjih, in which they gave preference to one Hadith and rejected the other one. The other method was Jama of the Hadith, in which they considered one Hadith general and the other specific. For example, Imam Abu Hanifa gave preference. We have two hadiths. Let me mention the hadiths first. There are two hadiths, authentic hadiths, in which the Prophet ﷺ forbade salah at certain times. So, Prophet ﷺ says, no salah is allowed after Fajr prayer until the sun has risen, and after Asr prayer until the sun has set. And this, by reference, if we check it, is a Sahih hadith of the Muslim. You can see it here. So it is a Sahih hadith that there is no salah. Salah is forbidden after Fajr until the sun is risen, and after Asr prayer until the sun has gone down. So Imam Abu Hanifa gave preference to the first hadith, and the other hadith is, sorry, I forgot to mention the other hadith. There is another authentic hadith where it is said that if any of you enters a masjid, he should pray 2 rakah units of prayer before sitting down. So this is the 2 units of prayer when you enter the mosque before the prayer has started by the Imam himself. And this is a mustahib prayer, highly recommended prayer. And this hadith has also been authenticated, as we can see that this is a hadith of Muslim again. So this is also a Sahih hadith. So what Imam Abu Hanifa did was that there was one hadith which forbade any prayer before the sun has risen, completely after Fajr, and completely and no prayer after Asr if the sun has not gone down completely. But the mustahib prayer is also there, and that is also a Sahih hadith. So what Imam Abu Hanifa did was he gave preference to the first hadith and ruled that all forms of salah were forbidden during the forbidden times. Imam Malik, Shafi and Ahmad combined the two hadiths, ruling that the first hadith were general and referred to the voluntary hadith, Nafal hadith, whereas the second hadith was specific, allowing highly recommended mustahab salah even during the forbidden times. So the correct ruling was, since you cannot ignore or reject a Sahih hadith, that's why Imam Malik, Shafi and Hanbali did a jama of the two hadiths, and they said that no nafal prayer is allowed in the forbidden time except the mustahib prayer, because a Sahih hadith supports it. So he said that the general ruling is no nafal prayer is allowed in these forbidden times except the mustahib prayer, which is a specific prayer, highly desirable prayer, and which has been recommended by the Prophet ﷺ by a Sahih hadith. So the preference way of resolving the textual conflict between the hadith is dropped, and the Jama method of resolving the of the textual conflict is taken. I hope I make myself clear. The third problem which arose, the third reason which was there for the rise of contradictory ruling between the 4 fiqh schools was the admissibility of certain principles. So there were, as I've already told you, that 4 principles had a consensus between the 4 fiqh schools that all these 4 principles are allowed, are are the primary sources of fiqh rulings. Number one, Quran. Number two, Hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. Number three, Ijma of the Sahaba. And number four, Qiyas. These four, in this order, had a consensus of all four schools that these are the allowable principles of extracting fiqh rulings. But there were other methods as well, which were used by one school and not by the other school. As a result, the rulings which were based upon these principles, which were contradictory according to one school and fine according to the other school, they created problems between the two fiqh schools. Let me read it for you. So, there were among the Imams some who developed a number of controversial principles. Why controversial? Because they thought that it was fine, but the other fiqh school thought that it was not fine, on which they based some of their rulings. As a result, both the ruling and the principle became sources of difference between the jurists. For example, the majority of jurists recognized the validity of ijma among the generations after the Sahaba, but Imam Shafi'i questioned its occurrence and Imam Hanbal completely rejected it. So, there was a consensus between the four fiqh schools on the ijma of the Sahaba, but the ijma of the scholars after the Sahaba was controversial. Why? Though it was accepted by Imam Malik and Imam Hanifa, it was not accepted by Imam Shafi'i, who questioned it because he thought that logistics was a huge issue since the Islamic State was huge and all the scholars cannot collect at one place to make a ruling for a specific issue. So he thought that it is impossible that all the scholars can come at one place. Logistic problem that they cannot come at one place to make a ruling for a single given issue. Because for an ijma to occur, each and every scholar has to agree to it without exception. So if there is even a single scholar who is not present at the time of ijma, it's not an ijma. So the logistic problem was there for Imam Shafi'i, but Imam Hanbal completely rejected it. Why? Because in the time of Imam Hanbal, there was grouping between the scholars. They were Muttazila scholars and they were traditionalist scholars. And they did not agree upon many things. Many things they did not agree upon. And there was no chance that an ijma can occur between in which all these scholars who had a completely different point of view, absolutely different point of view on many things, they can come together and make a ruling regarding an issue. So Imam Ahmad completely rejected it. Inshallah, we'll do it in detail. Then there was another ruling by Imam Malik. Imam Malik used to rely on the custom of the Medinites, and they said any hadith which contradicted the custom of the Medina is not an authentic hadith. And this was rejected by other schools. As I've already told you, that the Sahih hadiths which were narrated by, let's say, Hazrat Abdullah bin Masood, they never reached the Medinites. So they did their things different way because they had no access to the Sahih hadiths. So they might have used their own ijtihad or whatever, and their customs were different from what the Sahih hadith was telling. And when that Sahih hadith was brought in front of Imam Malik, he rejected it because the customs of the the people of Medina did not comply with it. He rejected it though it was a Sahih hadith. So the rulings which were based like that, the ijtihad which was done like that, in which the availability of the Sahih hadith was not present, those rulings became a point of conflict. Then the third was that Imam Abu Hanifa's principle of istihsan and Imam Malik's principle of istisla were both disallowed by Imam Shafi'i as being too independent of Quran and Sunnah and Ijma. So istisla and istihsan, these are approaches by which ijtihad is done. So ijtihad is not done by a single methodology. There are multiple approaches for doing a qiyas. Qiyas is the methodology by which an ijtihad is reached. Ijtihad is the ruling, the final decision, and the methodology by which you reach that decision is called qiyas. And there are different approaches by which a qiyas can be done. So a few of these approaches include istihsan of Hanafis and istisla of Malikis. But since ijtihad, analogical reasoning is being done, and ijtihad has to be based upon Quran and Sunnah. Imam Shafi'i thought that these methods were too independent of Quran and Sunnah, and he rejected them. So the rulings which were based upon these approaches were also rejected by Shafi'i school. On the other hand, Imam Shafi'i felt that the opinion of the Sahaba, individual opinion of the Sahaba, had to be accepted on legal matters, while others felt that it was also a personal reasoning on their part, which was not binding to later generations. So, personal reasoning of a single Sahabi was considered law by Imam Shafi'i. However, it was not considered law by the other schools because they thought that it was also an ijtihad made by a single Sahabi. The other Sahabi may not agree with it. So, one thing has to be made clear, that at the time of Hajj, the only Hajj the Prophet ﷺ did in his life, there were more or less 1,25,000 Sahabi present at that time. And after the death of the Prophet ﷺ, the Sahabis moved out. As I have already said, they migrated to different areas of Islamic State. And what was left behind was around 1,10,000 or 12,000 which were there. And 10, 15,000 had moved out. But there were hadith and fiqh scholars among those Sahabis who have moved out. We know that hadith narration is, though the Sahabi were 1,25,000, something around that, but hadith narration was not done by all of them. There were specific Sahabi who used to do the hadith narration, around 500 to 1,000 Sahabi only who did the hadith narration. And one of the top ones from those were Abdullah bin Masood and Hazrat Ali. A lot of these had been narrated from them, and a lot of fiqh rulings have been done by them. So this one also created a problem, that the opinion of a single Sahabi sorry, cannot be taken as law. Maybe other Sahabi do not agree with them, they have their own opinions. Maybe every Sahabi have their own opinion. So ijtihad has to be done, and we have to find the ruling which has the most strong proof. That is important. Inshallah, we'll do this in detail as well. The number 4 reason for the appearance of conflicting ruling between the schools was the various approaches. As I have already explained to you, that there are various approaches for doing qiyas to reach an ijtihad. And I have already told you that qiyas is the methodology by which an ijtihad, a ruling, is reached. So there were various approaches which jurists took in their application of qiyas. Some have been named, like istihsan, istislam, arsla, mursla, urf, and many others as well, and we'll do it in detail. But perhaps the largest source of differences amongst them, some narrowed down the scope of qiyas by setting a number of preconditions for its use, while others expanded its scope. Because this principle was based on opinion, personal reasoning of the scholar to a great extent than any of the others, there were no hard and fast rules with which to contain it, and thus a wide range of differences developed. So these are the 4 different reasons which have been given by this book as reasons for appearance of conflicting rulings between the 4 fiqh schools. As I have already mentioned before, that all these conflicting rulings can be resolved by unification of mazhabs, for which the most important ingredient is the presence of ikhlas between the presence of ikhlas by the scholars of the ummah. And till the time that we reach there, where that level purity of intention is present and ummah decides to unify the mazhabs and come up with unified rulings on every issue, we have to exercise critical thinking, because evidences are being exposed, they are being brought forward by different people, by different scholars, by different schools. So we have to do a critical thinking if we belong to the thinking Muslim category, and try to establish Tawheed in our own ways, personal ways. May Allah accept our efforts, and may Allah keep our intentions pure for Him. Inshallah, we'll continue with the evolution of fiqh in next lectures as well.